Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. In this video, I'm going to do a couple of things that I've been meaning to do for quite some time. First of all, I need to change the rubber belt on my vintage Pinnock sewing machine. I showed it to you quite some time ago, and I have been asked to use it in some of my videos, but I've had issues with the machine. When I received it, it wasn't working at all, so I pulled it apart, got it working. The belt has been slipping for the entire time, and it had a really dodgy power cord on there. It had frayed in several places. So I got Chris to replace the electrical cord for me. He did do a video on that, and I'll pop a link up somewhere. Now today I've got to change the belt because it's been slipping, so I haven't used the machine for that reason. I'm going to also do a little bit of maintenance on my regular Pro Sew machine that I use all the time. And there's a couple of other things that I have in my room that help me stay a little bit more organised, and one or two tools that are a bit handy as well. Come along and I'll show you what I do to make my life a little bit easier and a bit of maintenance. Okay, so here is the machine. I think this is a 1952 or 53 Pinnock sewing machine made in South Australia. It's such an adorable machine, isn't it? So let's go around to the side. I have unplugged it. I think most of you know I'm afraid of electricity, so Chris had to change the cord for me, and I have unplugged the machine. So this is the belt that I need to change, and you can see that there's quite a lot of slop in there. If I hold on to this spindle here, the belt will just move along quite easily. So it's clearly slipping and needs to be removed. I've ordered some new rubbers, and I think this one might be a little bit narrower, but it should still work. Let's see how it goes. I need to undo these two screws here, but because there's so much slop, this will actually come off very easily. And I'll just remove the belt from the hand wheel, and that's it. So this is the old one. This is the new one, and you can see that the size difference is huge. It's stretched quite a lot. And the diameter of the rubber are slightly different, but I think that that should still be okay. So I can take the new rubber and just pop that straight on over my hand wheel, back over the ridges where the rubber sits on the hand wheel. So if I turn this back around, and hopefully you can see, but just inside here there's a groove there where the rubber sits. So that sits inside there, and that's what helps your hand wheel turn and make your needle bar go up and down. Now this rubber, there's no way it's going to meet the motor here, so I need to undo these two screws and adjust the position of the motor. So I can move this across until I can get the rubber wheel on there, and it's going to be a tight fit because the motor won't come any closer to the machine than what it is, and this rubber is quite tight. So make sure you've got the rubber sitting inside that groove on your hand wheel, and then stretch it tight over this spindle. I've no idea what it's called, and then we can tighten up these screws again. So I'm going to leave it in this position that it is at the moment and see how that tension is. So there's a little bit of play there, which is what you need, but not as much as what we had earlier. So I reckon that might even be a good first go. Let me tighten that up. And I'll run the machine and see if it causes any slipping. When I depress the foot pedal, I want my machine to start sewing straight away. and usually it drags for quite a long time before it actually cranks over, and that worked straight away. So I'm really happy with that. I've got some thread in the needle now. And that's working perfectly. So that was a very quick fix for a slipping belt on the sewing machine. I should have done this months ago. Now this machine you all know really well. It's my Pro Sew Industrial Straight Stitch sewing machine. There's a couple of things that I like to have really handy at my machine at all times. And of course the three main things, and the one you see all the time, is my little flat screwdriver. It's really handy for holding fabric down when I get to bulky seams. I always have a pair of thread snips at all of my machines, whether it's at home or at work. Screwdriver and a pair of tweezers, they come in handy sometimes, even if it's just to turn corners through. My bobbins and spare sewing machine needles, and the 2 feet that I use the most. This one is my Teflon foot for sewing with vinyl, and this is the one that I use the most often for inserting zips. It's a really narrow foot. You can use it for regular sewing as well as for installing zips. There are some other types of feet that you can use for zips as well that have a little groove cut out, but I actually really like using that one. I always have a scrap of fabric when I put a new thread and bobbin in, and that's my new seam gauge that a viewer recommended I use. It's been very handy. Here are some other things that I always have around my machine. I've got a couple of magnets here, and I'll show you what I use those for in a minute. These are actually out of the side of a computer screen, Chris Scraps Electronics, and they're extremely strong magnets. Oh, that always scares me. I have 2 spice jars. One spice jar with the little holes at the top. I use that to throw away all my old needles. I can see one in there that's really full of gunk from the double-sided tape that I use, and I don't think that needle's actually very blunt, so I can transfer that into this jar where I also have some needles. And there's nothing wrong with the needles except that they got really gummed up when I was working with some terrible double-sided tape. So I've got a jar of acetone here. I just leave the needles soaking in there. I think you can even see a yellowish hue to the bottom. That must be the residue from the double-sided tape. Anyway, I've got my needles in there. They soak, and I can take them out, dry them off, and then there's no residue on them. I've got my regular brush for cleaning out the lint in the machine, but this one here is just a mascara brush. Obviously, you've got to wash all the mascara off really well, but it's a really handy tool to get in those tight places and clean out the lint in your machine. So an old mascara brush is very handy. I wash mine up when I finish with my mascara and just have some excess ones to clean out my machines. I do have this little ratchet screwdriver, and the reason I have that is because when I need to get in and undo these screws here, it's really difficult to get a screwdriver in here because of all the bits that are in the way in front of your machine. And same with at the back, there's other things happening at the back of the machine, and I can't easily get in to undo those screws. So I have this little ratchet screwdriver. I can get in and undo my stitch plate that way. So we're going to do that now because I've got to oil my machine in parts and I want to get in underneath and clean it out. I have just had the fright of my life. I'm really lost for words right now. In order to make sure everything is safe, I bent down to turn off my sewing machine at the power point. I use this power board for my iron and to have all of my machines and fans and things like that plugged in. Most of them are always switched off except for my main industrial sewing machine. I leave that on all the time because I use it all the time. But in order to be safe when I'm cleaning up underneath my machine, I just wanted to go and turn the switch off. And this is the switch that I had plugged in. Now what happened as I went to switch off the machine, I pressed the off switch, but the little plastic cover, it came off at the same time that I depressed the switch, and there's a little resistor and a light in there as well. And I've touched the bare wire with my fingertip, and oh my goodness, the jolt I received, it felt like I had a massive rat bite the tip of my finger, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I even told you guys how terrified I am of electricity just before. Here I am trying to be safe and go and get a jolt of electricity. Thankfully, I wasn't touching any metal, so all I got was a really huge shock, and it scared the life out of me. And of course, I've run to Chris in tears, and he's come to my rescue as usual. And then we've discovered that all of these little switches are all damaged in some way. So there's lots of cracks and things underneath all of them. So Chris is going to take this. He will scrap it or do whatever he does with it, and I'll have to go and buy myself a new power board. So there's my excitement for the day. I could have done without that. Let's get back to the machine. Well, now that I know that I'm perfectly safe from electrocution, I'm going to remove my presser foot just to make things easier to see. This piece of wire is a guard that sits over the front of my needle, and it helps prevent me from stitching through my finger. And I will also remove my needle, and I won't get attacked by the needle either. So now I'm going to take off my stitch plate with this little ratchet screwdriver. I can just sit that inside the slots on the screw, and then undo the screws. Much easier than trying to get one of those really long screwdrivers in there that don't even fit because everything else is in the way. And I'll do the same with the other one. I can move my slide plate out of the way, and I can remove this. And this is when you all find out how naughty I am. Let's have a close-up look of the mess that I've got in here. So you can see a build-up of lint just on the edge there, and even between the feed dogs, build-up of lint everywhere. I've been really naughty. I used to clean my machine every single time I changed my needle, but I just feel like I've been doing that a lot lately with all the gum residue and fabric types that I've been sewing with. So there's a big build-up of lint in here. The build-up of lint will actually have an effect on your sewing. I've had this happen to me on domestic machines, but the lint builds up so full inside the feed dogs here, it stops the fabric from feeding through properly. That all needs to be cleaned up. So I will get in and clean out all of that lint. You can see how thick it is in there. I'll see if I can get it out with my tweezers. Oops, lost it. So it's quite a big build-up of lint in there. I really shouldn't let my machine get to that stage. That's terrible of me. I'm going to give this a really good clean. Any of the lint that falls down below, I can pick that up when I push my machine back. Take my bobbin out, and that should be clean enough at the top there. Oh, this is really sad. I know I should be ashamed of myself, but I know also that I've seen much worse. Oh, look at all that lint everywhere. My goodness, I really need to clean this machine out more often. Let's get to it. This is where your bobbin goes inside here. And then I'll clean up on the inside. Find all sorts of little goodies in here. You can see lots of broken tips of needles in here. Wow, I've broken a few. I'll give this a really good clean in here. I mean, this doesn't have any effect on the machine. It's really just a great way to collect all your dust. And while I've got a magnetic pair of tweezers and some magnets, I might as well pick up those remnants of needles in here. That's come in pretty handy. I finished cleaning that out, and I'll also just clean out the lint that's inside my bobbin case. Bugger, that fell out. And then I'll have to pop that spring back in. All right, that looks to be a lot cleaner in there now than it was. I can now put the machine back the way it was, put my needle back in. I might as well put a new one in. All right, before I put the needle and foot back on, I'm just going to show you a couple of points on this machine that I've only just discovered need oiling. I've put a little marker in here. This grommet needs to come off, this one here, and this one already has a hole in the top of it, so a bit of oil will go in there as well. Really only needs a very tiny amount. I have this little oiler that I purchased from, I think, eBay or Amazon many years ago, and it just does a very small amount of oil. So all I need to do with this one, I don't have to remove the grommet, place a drop or two inside here, and you don't need much at all. So I've removed those little grommets, and in here you can see it looks like it's dirty, but it's not. It's actually a wick. So that just needs a little bit of oil. And then in here as well, I don't know how much I need to put in here, but I guess a couple of drops will suffice. And I can close all that up again and put some oil in on the side here. We need to open that up too. So it's just 3 screws to undo this side plate. Then there's a couple of places in here that I'm supposed to oil. This one here is your presser foot lever, and wherever you've got metal rubbing, I think against metal, you're supposed to oil it. So I'll do that at this point here, and also on the needle bar where that goes up and down. Although the oil that we've put in at the top here, that runs down in the needle bar as well. So I just need to put a drop of oil in here, and here, and here. And that's all. At least I hope that's all anyway. I'm sure Pete or Adam, if you see this video, you're going to tell me if there's any parts that I've missed or if I've done anything wrong. And there is just one more point in here, just behind that bar with the screw threads on it. You can see a little round thing that's got a cross in the front of it, and on top of that there's a little hole, which is where I'll also place some oil. Okay, before I show you how I have my sewing machine needles sorted, look at this mess. That was disgusting, wasn't it? I've put the machine back together again, and I'm going to show you what I do with my needles that soak in acetone. So let me just set the camera back up again. I have a little magnet attached to the side of my tweezers. Now, if your magnet is weak, then you can just stick that in your solution and pull your magnet out this way. But I kind of like that this is such a strong magnet that it's pulling my needles up. And how's that? They just come out on the magnet. I've got nothing left in there. And I have some fabric with some sewing machine oil on there. And I'll just give that a wipe to get rid of all the acetone. And then my needles are nice and clean now, and they don't have any of that sticky residue on them. And I can put those back where they belong. And I'll discard these ones safely when I get a few more in the jar. So let me show you what I do with these little magnets. I've used a Dymo labeler to cover the magnets, and I've put the size of my needles on each one of these individual magnets. And the needle that's attached to the magnet is the size of the needle on the label. When I need to know what size needles I've got in my machine, the one that's not on the magnet is the size that's actually in my machine. That's an easy way for me to know which needles I'm currently using. And I have these magnets set up on my machine at work as well. It's really handy. And the last little tool I have is this jeweler's loop. Picked it up off eBay years ago, and it's too difficult to see what size needles I have in my machine. I certainly can't see that by eye. So basically all I do is look through the lens and I'll turn my needle around until I can actually see what's written on there. That's much better. I can see that now. And this tells me what size needle I have. I wanted to do something a little bit different from all the sewing videos that I do all the time. And I'm really excited now that I finally got the belt changed on that Pinnock sewing machine and I can actually start using it as well. So stay tuned. There will be some videos coming up where I'll actually be using that machine. I'll try and do it a little bit more often. I know a lot of people use domestic sewing machines and they think they can't do the work that I do on a regular machine, but trust me, you can. Until a couple of years ago, I did all of my sewing on a regular old clunky sewing machine and it just goes slower. You can still do it. You've just got to be a little bit more careful in some spots. What do you think of that magnet idea? I've had them on my machine at the shop for quite some time and I used a really big one and I had rubber bands wrapped around each segment so that I could isolate the different size needles. And when Chris pulled apart a computer about a month or so ago, I thought they would be perfect. So I whipped up some labels, stuck them on my machines, and they're fantastic. It's probably one of the most useful little things that I have beside my machine or near my machine. How about nearly killing myself? Well, maybe I didn't nearly kill myself, I don't know, but I got the shock of my life. Honestly, I only used my middle finger to flick the switch and it felt like a massive rat bite. Not that I've ever even had a small rat bite. I don't know what they're like, but it really felt like something bit me and my heart was racing. I was bawling my eyes out and ran down to the shed to get Chris. He looked after me well and took the offending power board away, and now I'm left with only one power point to plug everything into, but at least I'll be safe. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.